was a much better response. Some of you probably already guessed it. Because if you present somebody with many happening, you're going to start generating confusion disorder in his system. It takes time for him to sort out what's going on. You're trying to stretch out his time. Make it difficult for him to adapt. Stretch him out. Because while you're stretching him out, in the meantime, you do something else, and you have to stretch him from there, too. That, in turn, multiplies your opportunities to get into his gaps, exposed lines, and vulnerable areas. That, in turn, allows you, then, to splinter his organism and develop his disconnecting remnants at all levels, tactical, grand tactical, strategic. In other words, you have envelopment inside envelopment inside envelopment, not only thrust in it, you start just pull them literally apart. In other words, the inverse Clausewitzian, depending on cooperative centers of gravity. So it can't function as an organic whole. You can't get a focus and direction, both of the oncoming event. Incidentally, when I talk about tactical, grand tactical, strategic, in the military sense, normally think of tactical up to about the, when you talk about in terms of levels, up to about division, grand tactical, or nowadays they like to call it the operational level. From division up to army group, and strategic army up group to theater and beyond. So when I talk about levels, you see that sense. It's not exactly that, they tend to do it in that sense. That's kind of reasonable. So now if we glue all that together, we can lay out what I call, in a sense, what we call the essence of the blitzkrieg. Where they're kind of pulling everything together now. I think somebody I was talking to right after the last break, as a matter of fact, we were talking about this in the campaign. When you start, teams start coming unglued, people start departing the scene and everything else. They don't want to be part of a losing campaign. That's what happens. Talking about that, so you can put that pressure on your adversary and cause him to start coming unglued in certain areas. Then he starts losing his allies, and it makes it even more difficult for him to cope. Okay? Kind of try to use it in your own later on. Blitz results. Here, I'm talking about Poland here. He's advanced through France and referring to Patton here. Manchuria, I'm talking about the Russians against the Japanese quantum army. Middle East, the Israelis, Russians in 68 against Czechoslovakia. Once again, the Israelis again after they got their act together. Unsuccessful. Russia, winner 41-42. Partial reason for that lack of success. Only partial, the winner was it. There's some more fundamental reason I'll get on to later on. Russia, fall winner 42-43. Here I'm referring to the Caucasus-Stalingrad campaign. And interestingly enough, initially the intent of that operation was to mask off Stalingrad and try to conquer the Caucasus. Instead, Hitler decided he wanted to take Stalingrad. And of course, when they did that, they started going strength against strength, violating strength against weakness, and of course the whole thing turned into a debacle. North Africa, 42. Here I'm referring to Rommel against the British. Initially, Rommel had great successes against the British, but eventually the British, by reading his communications, cut his lines of communications, overwhelmed him and did him in, as you well know. And one of the big reasons, of course, initially when they did have the advantage, of course, Hitler was treated as a peripheral theater because he was occupied elsewhere and didn't give Rommel the forces and that they needed in order to do the job. It might have turned out differently if they did. In any case, Russia, summer 43. Here I'm referring to the Battle of Kursk. The Russians got wind of what the Germans were up to through their own intelligence, and that the Germans were trying to pinch out what's called the Kursk salient. And since the Russians knew where the onslaught was coming, either very near or in that Kursk salient, they stashed in there roughly 1.4 million men. And the Germans leaked off with about 750,000. And since they not only knew what the Germans were up to, they had even their initial axes of advance where they were coming from, then they could figure out the way they could adapt too. Of course, the thing resulted in a disaster for the Germans. They lost the Battle of Kursk. That was before you believe it. And then, of course, the Ardennes. That was against ourselves, Americans. Again in December 16, 1944. there were two penetrations. There was a northern penetration and a salient that came in. It was the 6th SS Panzer Army under Sieg Dietrich. In the southern sector, there was the 5th Panzer Army under Wehrmacht commander Manteuffel. The Schwerpunkt was assigned to Dietrich, the 6th SS Panzer Army. They got hung up. The commanders tried to prevail upon Hitler to shift the Schwerpunkt. He did not. By the time he did, in the meantime, Manteuffel got stopped, so the whole thing, they lost their flexibility and adaptability to that. In other words, what you see happening, as time went on, we see a more centralized top-down command and control system beginning to exist in the German system. So what's my point? We see in Poland, for example, Hitler levied a general intention upon the German army that carried it out. He did not interfere in operations. For the most part in France, he did. Except remember, it did stop the Panzers outside of Dunkirk, and of course the British got out of Dunkirk. But as time went on, it began to impose itself more and more in the operational aspect of the war. Until finally we got to the Ardennes, very deeply involved in very highly centralized command and control system. It raised an interesting question. Why did Hitler gravitate towards such a system? Why did he do that? And of course, every German officer that I talked to always came up with the same answer. He did not trust his commander. In other words, his system was based upon mistrust, not trust. Now, if you go back to Napoleon, it was the same thing, in a different sense. Remember, he held a grand design in his mind, didn't trust his commanders. Not only that, he knew what he picked, so for single. Do what he wanted. Of course, politicians don't do that either. We're getting down to fundamentals. And so we see that kind of thing. So if you pick those kind of people, then you have to live with the result. But the key thing is, when you begin to think about it, when you let that all that information wash over your brain, all of a sudden a fundamental truth comes out. All centralized command and control systems are based upon mistrust. Otherwise, why do you need it? Otherwise, why do you need it? They're all based upon mistrust. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have one. Coming back the other way. To illustrate, and you people have some of the same problems. In Balks, I use him because he says it so well, articulates things well. He says, look at, let's pretend you're division commander. Because, you know, you get a little pick of who you're going to get from the personnel people. They're also going to send you what you don't want, because you're not going to get the pick of the litter. The other guys have to take the drag. And he said, so what you really are faced with, the people that are good, you want to allow to put them in a long leash. The people who are not so good, you're going to watch them very carefully, because they're going to get you in trouble. But what does that suggest? Instead of talking about any one kind of a command and control system, you're talking about a multi-dimensional command and control system. Now, if you have modern electronics, you're going to feed your command and control system. That's hard to do. Instead, you tend to get the lowest common denominator, the one that feeds the people who are going to get you in trouble. Now it tends to become more rigid. Military, all these fusion centers and all that, explicitly detailed order. I can cite example after example that's been done badly on my day. That's one reason. Another reason is you might want to do it. So that's based upon mistrust, because it should be. This guy's going to get you in trouble. Another reason is, even if people are gifted, is you're talking about strategic items like nuclear weapons. You're not going to let a guy, you're not going to give him a lot of freedom of action. He may launch a couple of megatons. That's based upon mistrust. It should be. So you want to keep those kinds of things in mind. When you go to centralized command and control or very detailed instructions based upon mistrust, because the question is, if not, why do you need it? I mean, there might be good reasons. You have to keep that in mind. Very important. Okay, with that in mind, let's shift gears now and go to guerrilla warfare. This is my most dense chart, just a little bit more than the other one. Modern guerrilla campaign. I'll let you read this. Take the time to read it, because this is the kind of things that are more closely aligned to what you people are involved in. Note the first bullet. Capitalize on discontent and mistrust. You know your adversary, you know there's going to be problems there. You want to exacerbate that. lot of actions taking place here in East Vermont. Very high political content, you can see. Some of these things I don't recommend for your campaign, though. I
Why not?
Some of the more sharper aspects.
Well, what's wrong with rods again?
And you do that more than we do. But you see what's going on. Many things are going on here. There's a couple things I want to draw your attention. First of all, remember we talked about the blitzkrieg, or normal, or what I call, you might say, conventional operations. They tend to be only destructive in character. But here you're seeing two kinds of things. They're destructive in one sense, but there's also constructive in other sense. You're trying to build up allies on your side at the same time, build up your system. In particular, I try to make that vivid with this particular bullet right here, where you're trying to do that kind of thing. Remember what Sun Tzu said, know your enemy, know yourself. He was only 2/3 correct. You have to know your enemy, know yourself, and know those others out there. Those third parties, the uncommitted. And you think about it, in a political campaign, you have that same problem. You have to know yourself, know your enemy, and the people that are going to vote. See, we like to say, well, in the military, there's the bad guy and there's the good guy. There's also other people looking on. If you misbehave, he's going to build up the allies. You become my slave. Now you have a hard time making a take or not taking the case may be. So in that sense, Sun Tzu only had a 2/3. Know your enemy, know yourself, and the uncommitted third parties, potential adversaries, whatever you want to call it. Very important. You've got to keep that in mind. I normally bring it out later, but I'd have to deal with you people being in the political business. I should bring it out now since we're talking about this particular chart. But I think you get the drift of what's going on here. Both a destructive and a constructive effort. Destructive, where you're trying to make your adversary so he can't play, destroy his stability, build up yours, and suck the people over to your side. Blitzkrieg doesn't do that. So then, when you begin to look at it, you can say, in a sense, and here's the essence of a guerrilla campaign. You have the destructive part here, and the constructive part here. In some sense, we have problems in Vietnam because we're going to handle out a few trinkets and good stuff that's going to establish the line. That doesn't work. You got to really get in there. You know, trust me. Work.
The language problem.
Language is a big problem. That's correct. Very big problem. And the intent's very simple. And of course, the implication. They can penetrate their adversary's moral, mental, and physical being. They're able to get right in there. Generate those. At the same time, they build up their moral, mental, and physical stability. So we both have both destructive and constructive effort. So if we look back, let's tie a few things together now. Remember, we talked about 19th century capitalism, global revolutionary strategy, modern guerrilla campaign. Pull it together, what's that underlying strategic philosophy? Sort of redundancy or summation here. I really can't overemphasize it. Think of it this way too. You all have certain friends. When you're with somebody, you get to share their experience over time. There's certain delicate things you don't say to them. They're going to. We all know that. Just we mentally say that's forbidden territory to talk about or bring it up. It's just something we automatically do. Well, but turning the argument around, you know your adversary, try to find out those hidden things in a delicate way, bring it out so he comes unglued, and you lever it enormously. You don't want to see like you're a party, you've got to come out so he does it for himself. It looks like you're a party, but you can also destroy your own morals. You really can't morally isolate somebody. That's very important to know. In politics, you well know, in one sense, you want to isolate your adversary and build up your support. And likewise, don't have that happen to you. Basically, that's the danger. But there's three aspects of isolation: moral, mental, and physical. You can physically isolate somebody. Military knows that. Mentally, you can isolate somebody, which I'll tell you later on. Morally, you can't. He has to isolate himself. I'll get into that later. You really can't isolate. He has to do it. Of course, you can set things up so he dives into it. That's up to him. You really can't do that. He has to do it himself. Okay? Now, here's an insight. Now, we're always talking about support of the people. What the hell does that mean, having support of the people? So let's take that on. Get a deeper appreciation for that. In fact, you people probably already do, since you're in political games, some military people, let's pick it up. Implicit connections are bonds. Implicit connections, those shared experiences, those shared values we're talking about. You have to be able to blend into the emotional, cultural, and intellectual environment. You can't stand apart. It doesn't work. You've got to get right in there. You're breathing and thinking and seeing the way they do. That's why they put people in to do that. Because when you do that, then you become one with the people. You do have those implicit connections or bonds. In this sense, what you're doing, then the people's feelings and thoughts become guerrillas' feelings and thoughts. In other words, you tend to build up the way they think. And remember what I told you earlier, if you have too sharp an ideology, what's going to happen, that's going to inhibit that process. You've got to be able to see it from their viewpoint. And once you understand that, then while guerrilla feelings and thoughts become people, in other words, you can start working the fact them so you can start getting them going your way. It takes time. And the result, if you do it correctly, guerrillas become indistinguishable from the people while the government is separated or isolated from the people. In other words, they have nothing to run. They can't figure out why they lost. And then they all start pointing fingers at one another, which we're still doing over Vietnam. The military's blaming the Congress, they don't know who the hell they're blaming, and people out there trying to figure out who's at fault. And the veterans that are coming back says, we got screwed. Look around, what's happening? Remember, you've seen the thing is that you've heard Weinberger make a statement. We're not going to do another campaign without the support of the people. Remember, he laid out those 6 points or whatever you're going to have one of the key ones. First, you have to have an aim or goal, and there's some other ones there. But also, we're not going to get into another goddamn military operation without the support of the people. Well, if that's the case, then we had every right to go in Vietnam because the people did support that operation when we went in. But they didn't later on, and that's the key question. Why not? So on that basis, we had every right to go in Vietnam. You go back and read the literature at the time we went in there. They supported American people. Of course, they lost it. Good question. Why? We don't like to answer that question. There's a good reason. We don't like to answer. I'll get into it later on. Just hang on to it.
How do you defend against that?
Pardon?
How do you defend against that?
I'll get into it later. All in fact, we're almost here. I'm laying it all blitzkrieg and grill. We're later on with a counter blitz and counter grill. Right now I'm just shoving it all in one direction. Okay? So then, if you look at it, if you look at a guerrilla campaign, or political campaign, and know what I say here, not only demonstrate government, Mr. Adversary, road government influence, but cause government to alienate itself from the people. You know how we don't understand it? We say the people are alienated from the government. That's not true. The government literally alienates itself from the people. That's what you want. Alienate itself. And of course, the other side is to bring support of people from your side. Don't alienate the people. The government alienates itself from the people. Remember what I said. When you're talking about alienation, in fact, I'll give you 3 code words here. If you're talking about cutting or severing lines of communication, in a sense, you're talking about disconnection or separation. They call it severance, I like the word separation. If you're talking about mental isolation, physical isolation, you're talking about cutting lines of communication. Code word, disconnection or separation. If you're talking about mental isolation, can anybody give me the code word for that? No. Disorientation. When many isolating, disorient. The code word for moral isolation, alienation. Now the military, you go back in history, they're always talking about cutting the guy's lines of communication in a physical sense, but they don't really come to grips with the mental isolation or the moral isolation. Remember what I told you, physically you can isolate somebody, mentally you can, morally he's got to do it for himself. Get back to me. Okay? Let's look at some results here, real results. It's incomplete list. American colonies. Here we black the redcoats, down here we became the redcoats. We're in full circle. Okay. I don't want to go through all of them. Unsuccessful. Philippines. We're talking about Philippine insurrection, turn of the century. We did some interesting things here when you read the history. Too bad we didn't learn from it. We start out badly, but then some people start thinking, hey, this is stupid. We got to change our act. We made it pay off. South Africa. This is the Boer War, the British. Caused the British enormous problems. And in a sense, I really put it in the wrong column. In a sense, it should be over here. Because even though the British got the Boers to sign up for the armistice, the only way they could do so is by giving them some very easy terms, and the Boers got their independence later on anyway. So in a sense, that's a misnomer, only because they signed up for the armistice. We're familiar with these. Greece, just toward the end of World War II and beyond. Philippines. And here in the Philippines is an interesting case. A gentleman by the name of Ramon Magsaysay came on the scene about 1950. With about 2 years, turned a disaster into a victory. Almost going down to 2. He was a very gifted guerrilla leader. Note the word, guerrilla leader. You know what he was? He was a guerrilla working for the government. He used their techniques against them. Against the guerrilla. So we see that, of course, with the Milan experience. Okay, with that in mind, let's see a sort of a common theme that creeps up between the two. The essence of it. First of all, you don't necessarily go for the battle. I'm not saying you should avoid all battles, but that shouldn't be your preferred solution. Avoid the battle. Instead, you want to cut up his organic integrity, as indicated by the statement. You've got to penetrate his system, subvert, disrupt, or seize those connection centers, etc., that allow him to operate his organic whole. You exploit these qualities. The idea is to generate surprise and shock and reproduce it over and over again. That in turn allows you to roll up or wipe out those isolated or disconnected debris in your system. And if you think about that, the intent then becomes a natural consequence of all that. That's what you realize. That's what you realize. Breaks, cohesion, paralyze them, collapse. Incidentally, I'll show you an example of this cutting those connections or centers. I left it out of the book. Israeli example, 1949 by Yaniv. same idea there. Okay? So it raised a rather interesting question. Why have they been so extraordinarily successful? Their tactics they have. And here's the message and the underlying idea. I'll let you read it very quickly and then I'll comment on it. Once again, let's invert the argument. Let's assume you're going to be more distinct, more regular, and slower. My God, you're not going to do anything. You have no choice. You want to be this way. And you better examine your activities to be sure you're that way. Just invert the argument and begin to see the beauty of it when you invert it. Because that's going to permit you to do these things. As a matter of fact, those kinds of things permit you to get inside his OODA loops. Or get inside his mind kind of thing. In other words, penetrate his moral, mental, physical being. You're going to get right inside his system. You got it. And if you start holding rigid ideas, rigid ways of operating, you're not going to get that off. The mere fact that you want to look at your adversary's philosophy, you want to understand the way he operates, that doesn't mean you have to, but you have to understand it from his viewpoint. Motion. And then that will give you the opportunity to study. And of course, then you see the underlying idea. Of course, not only does Sun Tzu imply that, but we recognize it. When you look at those resource infiltration techniques, at least in the physical sense. As a matter of fact, for you people who read Little Heart, it's one of a much better book. Little Heart's thing, I think it's a lot of garbage there. So that explains why I am. Doesn't really come to grips with it. Read Fuller's book, The Conduct of War from 1789-1961. Very nice stuff there. Politically so too, for your people. Very nice stuff. Very introspective stuff. Really look into it. How many people read Little Hearts, the strategy indirect approach? Remember we talked about the indirect approach as being a dislocation being an indirect approach. My God, he's got circular reasoning. He's going to dislocate a guy's mind. You don't dislocate a mind, you disorient it. Talks about dislocation, wedges, lines. Christ, he's a chiropractor at war. You know, you have to understand the fact that the way he uses words, as you can tell, he doesn't understand it. You don't dislocate a mind. When you start thinking about disorientation, what kinds of things is that? How do you do it? He didn't even come to grips with that. Fuller did. He might not say it that way, but you see that kind of stuff, doesn't you? Okay, that's why I think it's an important thing to consider. In any case, I finally got there. Some people want to know when we're going to look at it the other way. So, it raises these questions naturally since we've gone all one way. How can we counter what's likewise a growth movement? So let's look into it. Now remember earlier we showed a chart and talked about this kind of phenomenon. In fact, one hand, you know, you're trying to be irregular. On the other hand, you're trying to go deep. You're trying to adapt. And we made a point similar to this. It was difficult to sustain fast tempo. You're forced to do all the shifting and also trying to go deep. That's correct. And that is a vulnerability that lets you want to play upon that. So let's look at a counterpart. So one chart snapshot. I'll let you read it and I'll comment. And I want to see if there's a certain view that comes out of it after you read it. Some people pick it up. You probably all do. Some people are able to maybe just say it more directly too. notion I want to drive home here after you read it too. Key idea up here. Think of areas, regions, and zones. Remember, terrain doesn't wage war, machines don't. You don't try to defend terrain, you use the terrain as what? A medium for maneuver. You try to set yourself to do that. You have your intelligence operation. Note here, deploy, disperse, and deploy and redisperse. Remember, you have to do that. After you set up one way, you keep setting up that same way, or set up a certain way, you keep it that way. Pretty soon, enemy intelligence and direct the activity can discern what you're up to. So you want to change those deployment dispersal routines as long as you can still form your own local main effort, because you're feeding them a basketball fog all the time. In other words, raises uncertainty. And that's how you do it. Like the Army says, you want to deprive your adversary of the opportunity to sand table. In other words, if you're sitting in the same position, pretty soon they lay out sand tables, lay out all kinds of delicate attacks trying to get in your system. But if you keep changing it, Christ, they're never going to lay out the sand table. So they can lay out a nice articulated attack against you, because you're very amorphous, you're very uncertain, and just can't get a good image or picture of what you're up to. And third, your reserve. And it raises an important question. What the hell do you want reserves for? Clausewitz said it very well. 2 out of the 3. 2. 1, it's a hedge against what? Uncertainty. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, so you need uncertainty in order to deal or adjust to unforeseen circumstances. That's one reason. Another reason, by having reserves, you also keep the operation going. In other words, you don't get all tired out where your people are. You put reserves up and bring the other guys back into reserves, so you can maintain the tempo or sustain operation. And there's a third reason. You also, since you have the reserve, your adversary doesn't know how you're going to use it, you build uncertainty in his camp. So he can't cope. He doesn't know how you're going to use it. So then, your action. You want to begin the erosion action, and also, on him at the same time, the first bullet here, try to get an image or a picture of what he's up to. Don't step in here and take him on right away. I see it too often in the Pentagon. We do certain things to him, like you probably already know him, the social reform movement. We do certain things to him, and Christ, they react right away, we cut them up. If they were smart, they'd try to step back and try to suck us in. If you react too fast tactically, you may lose a fantastic strategic opportunity. Sometimes you want to give tactically so you get a big strategic grab. In any case, you get that picture. Remember, we're not trying to defend the terrain, we're using the medium for maneuver. Then with that information, you can start allocating your people, start feeding them into those sectors that lie adjacent to the oncoming thrust. In other words, you can dig locally into their flanks and rear, cut off their supply efforts, etc. That doesn't mean you'll make it, because they know probably you're going to do some of that stuff, so they put out flank guards, particularly a lot of troops coming through there, and they may stop you. But then you have these reserves back there, you can swing in a deep flank counterstroke and roll up. So while they're hitting you with many happenings, you hit them with many counter happenings. Roll up the rear. The idea is very simple. What does all this suggest? Anybody? Let me just say, what does it all suggest?
Like you have split to split.
Say, what you do, it's a reverse split. And in a sense, you have an advantage. Remember, he's coming into your territory. You know it better. All you got to do is just don't lose your nerve. And don't worry about defending the terrain. Use the terrain as a medium for maneuver so you can take out his force. You know it better. But if you say, God, I'm going to defend this bit of ground, it's playing in the rain. Now, there might be some areas you have to defend. She's a fighter pilot. I can't step out and capture that cloud. My whole world's a world of maneuvering. If I don't do it right, I'm going to get taken out. That's why when I first got this stuff, like, all these ground people, they're all getting that tax or that piece of ground. What the hell with it? Let it go and take them out. Then I started reading about all these German blitzcommanders and other people. That's what they're doing. It seems to work. Why don't we do that? You can't get too attached. See, they think, well, we're moving backwards. What's that? Well, we're on the defense. But no, as long as you have the initiative. I don't care if you move backwards, forwards, sideways, or any other direction. You have to use that terrain so you can take out the force, then you get it all back. There's many successful people who have done that. In fact, Manstein was one of the successful practitioners of that. Go ahead.
What would you label terrain in political context? What would you label the terrain in political context? Definition of terrain.
Well, you're talking about the population or people out there. That's the terrain you're going to be working with. And your adversary may be doing certain things there, and you might lead him to success, but as long as you know there's a horrible contradiction there and you lead him in there, you want to get him in deep, because if he only does a little bit and you move back, then he makes the adjustment. If you get him in deep and can't make the adjustment, then he discredits himself. It's down the tube. See, because I've seen people do it. I've even seen some of the TV programs where I'll make a mistake, and I said, God, you got to really drag him in deep now, and the guy makes a comeback, and the guy gets out of it. Suck him in, reinforce, let him get in real deep, and then, there's no way out. He's emphasizing. Come back too soon. You want to, when you see it, say, hey, I got to get this guy in deeper. He loves it. I got to feed him some more success. But you give him a tactical success for a strategic disaster. You want to start, you got to think about it. Remember, you got to, when you do it, you got to think it through. You know there's a paradox here and you leverage it. Got that paradox.